When you think of skyrocketing brands like Aloe, Allbirds, or Skims, it's easy to credit their success to great products, sleek branding, and brilliant marketing. But here's the overlooked secret. The real magic lies in the engine behind the scenes, the business powering their business. For millions of brands, that engine is Shopify, making selling seamless for them and shopping effortless for us. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Aloe Yoga uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/retail, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/retail to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/retail.
Lowe's knows July 4th savings are worth celebrating. Right now, get up to 40% off select major appliances and get an additional 10% off 2 or more select major appliances. Plus, get 3 Scott's Naturescapes 1.5 cubic foot mulch bags for just $10. These deals are coming in hot. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 7/9. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. See Lowe's.com for more details. Excludes Alaska and Hawaii.
Welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. Bit of a heads up for tomorrow. We've got another kind of one of our double interview Wednesdays. I don't like sometimes to kind of pre-announce them too much. I kind of want it to be a tour of mysteries for you. But we're looking at kind of Chilean folk music. And we're also examining the exciting world of murder mysteries of the Edwardian era. So that's as much as I'm gonna say. But tune in. So that's going to be happening tomorrow, and we're doing so well at the moment from interviews. There are lots and lots of fascinating book proposals and ideas coming out that we're going to be talking some more about. So I'm really glad that we can bring those to you guys. So today, I guess there's been a lot I've been reading about recently about kind of economic history, and there's some really key texts that are coming out that help us to make sense of the moment we're in here. It's very, very pivotal, very in many ways very dangerous moment that we exist in, where the nature of if you can call it capitalism, what we'll think of as 21st century capitalism is being formed, and resistance to that. And I've been reading a lot recently as a great political journalist or economic journalist, if you will, on Twitter, William Huo. If you get a chance to look him up, he's a great guy to follow. Some really fascinating takes about the kind of end state neoliberalism and China, America and China. And a whole bunch of other stuff besides. And one thing that he was talking about today was the difference between billionaires in America and oligarchs. And he had an interesting definition for an oligarch. So there are lots of billionaires, but they don't, they're very wealthy, but they don't get a look in at the top table. And what oligarchs do, in addition to being very rich, is that they get to shape in America anyway, they get to shape the system of wealth and power. They get to write the economic rules. And he referred particularly to the former Google executive Eric Schmidt, who, if you listen to him at the moment, is very vocal about the future of AGI and where that might take us. I would take what he has to say with a pinch of salt, but it's not. I don't think he's entirely wrong. So it got me thinking about oligarchy and why it is here in the 21st century we're considering this term at all. What is an oligarch? I mean, and how do we define it? Well, let's dive into that. But my thesis to begin with, my opening thesis as to why we once talked about Russian oligarchs and now we talk about American ones, is because since the end of the Cold War, the economic conditions and the ideological conditions required to make oligarchs in both countries have prevailed in both countries. It was considered that at the end of the Cold War, in this kind of era of triumphalism, that democracy had triumphed over tyranny. But what has really happened is that unfettered capitalism has triumphed over liberal democracy, what remained of it in America, and what remained of a state-led, undemocratic command economy that notionally called itself socialism, but was anything but. These two creaking systems were replaced by a form that has emerged in the 21st century as a kind of almost feudalism. And this is not the end of history as was predicted in 1989 or 1990. The oligarchy is defined by the exercise of political power. You get people who you might think of as oligarchs because they're extraordinarily wealthy, but do they rule? The Greek origins of oligarch is oligos, which is few, and archein, which is to rule. So it is rule by the few. It's the circumstances by which a small number of exceedingly wealthy, exceedingly powerful people understand how to concentrate power and maintain its concentration. They often don't need to overthrow democracy. They simply render it obsolete. They short circuit it. This can be done through the funding of political parties. This is done through donations. I mean, Elon Musk, in the most kind of overt, unsubtle way, decided that he wanted Trump to win in the 2024 presidential election. I think Musk can easily be described as an oligarchic figure, one that has fallen out of favour, rather, as would have been very easily predicted. But the question, I suppose, as to how sort of centibillionaires managed to accumulate that much wealth in the first place is perhaps the more pertinent one. It stands to reason that once an individual has bought or can afford virtually anything, they have an income that small countries would normally have, what they will almost always do is purchase political power. Why? Because political power is a very attractive thing to purchase. Firstly, it means that you eliminate any vulnerability to your wealth. You're going to ensure that the person who you hire or appoint or fund isn't going to tax you. And also, you have now you don't need to worry about making money or surviving ever again. Your you have more money than you can spend in a lifetime, more money you can even fritter away in a lifetime, often the urge comes to try to reshape the world around you in your own particular perverse ways, to suit your own particular interests and obsessions, which almost never ever coincide with the interests of what we might think of as the common weal, the common good. Your wealth exists um, not even in spite of the common good, but at the expense of the common good, as hoarding wealth always does. So, oligarchy always has to be a kind of conspiracy against the demos, against the public. In Russia, this was possible because of the conditions in which the Soviet Union ended. The economic shock doctrine that was suggested by or imposed by the West through the IMF, which ensured that state industries could be sold for a song. There was at some point some kind of reasoning behind all of this, that the economic shock doctrine would be painful for a while, and then magically, out of all of this economic hardship, a new kind of society in the former Soviet Union would emerge, new sorts of people. I mean, this is all kind of the sort of fantasy thinking dreamt up in university economics departments, mainly in Chicago, which has no bearing on the world, and is the kind of thing that is readily lapped up by political think tanks and foreign policy institutes, and the sorts of people that get paid pretty attractive salaries for coming up with some of the 20th and the 21st century's stupidest and most destructive ideas. But essentially, on the ground, there's a book I've referred to recently by Svetlana Alexeyevich, called Second-Hand Time, which, if you do want an oral history of the end of communism and the end of the Soviet Union, and a snapshot as to why the West is widely disliked within the Soviet Union, get that book. It really is well worth reading. But the experience that ordinary Russians had at the end of the Cold War was one not only just of impoverishment, but also humiliation. And in a way, people are more able, when the economic times change, of recovering from impoverishment than they are from the experience of humiliation of a country that has a fairly robust sense of itself, and therefore citizenry that has a fairly robust sense of itself being plunged into abject poverty. There are stories in Second-Hand Time of really pretty kind of professional men and women in manufacturing industries being sent to kind of hawk children's toys on the streets in Eastern Europe in order to scrape a living by. And you don't undo those kinds of psychical scars. Think of the experience of the Great Depression, and how that affected generationally people. But also, it creates a kind of a crisis of narrative, and this has happened in America too. There was a photo last week of a kid graduating from something or somewhere and waving his laptop at the camera with ChatGPT on his laptop, with a big, broad grin on his face, showing that he had essentially cheated. ChatGPT had given him the answers. Now, in many cultures, the shame of that would be unbearable. There are Japanese, Chinese, Indian, and Korean students that would have felt, almost suicidal with the shame of that. This boy clearly wasn't exhibiting any of those traits. Why? Well, because a culture has emerged in America, and I think the same thing as it emerged in post-Soviet Russia as well, of the kind of the wide appreciation of the scam, of understanding that essentially everything is a scam, and that the only way of functioning as a human being is to be part of the scam and not to be the victim of the scam. And so there is the idea of being the scam artist has been elevated to a kind of almost civic virtue. There are TV programs and shows that now kind of articulate not just dishonesty, but also ruthlessness. The fallout from the 2008 financial crisis showed that the entire workings of this supposedly utopian system was based on a pack of lies. You have a fraudster for a president, somebody who has narrowly evaded imprisonment on a number of occasions, somebody who walks away from bankruptcies, who has ripped people off in his universities and his vodka and his stakes and his real estate and all this kind of stuff. And this is abundantly clear. People know this. This is not a secret. This is not hidden. And it is in some ways become part of a new set of civic virtues. So that there is nothing that can really positively happen there as a result of that. But also, there's a kind of an insipid, there's a kind of tacit acceptance that democratic norms, which involve the rule of law, adherence to civic values, adherence to notions of fair play, adherence to notions of almost self-police decency, these kinds of things. These sorts of values have been swept away by what? Why has this happened? Well, because we have this hegemonic force, this idea of free market values, that kind of anything goes and everything is fair play, and that regulation or sanctions that limit this kind of aggressive hyper-individualism is somehow kind of almost kind of a heresy. You know, these are the sorts of things you cannot and should not say. In Russia, of course, or during the Soviet Union, a widespread cynicism, really from the kind of the earliest days of the USSR, was there. There was a knowledge from the get-go that relatively scarce resources, things like housing and food and the other basics of life, had to be acquired through connections. This idea of blat that I've talked about previously, which is blat it means essentially who you know. If you need an apartment, then there's a very long waiting list. But if you have blat, then you might get yourself to the front of the waiting list if you have a friend who has a friend. And then there are favours baked into all of that. So this was a kind of a more grassroots corruption of the system. Corruption at that level always tends to exist when there is not enough stuff and people are desperate. There's a great bit in Sheila Fitzpatrick's Everyday Stalinism, where she talks about how food shortages and housing shortages at the beginnings of the 5-year plans were almost as acute as they were during the Russian Civil War. When you look at this kind of constructivism, this Stalinist building of the future, you have to remember that came alongside acute poverty and hardship.
Lowe's knows July 4th savings are worth celebrating. Right now, get up to 40% off select major appliances and get an additional 10% off 2 or more select major appliances. Plus, get 3 Scott's Naturescapes 1.5 cubic foot mulch bags for just $10. These deals are coming in hot. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 7/9. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. See Lowe's.com for more details. Excludes Alaska and Hawaii.
Um, and so there was this. There has always been this culture of utter cynicism towards the state throughout the period of the 20th century in Russia, and no doubt beforehand. Um, and after the end um, of the Cold War, it seems from my reading of various post-Cold War literatures that most Russians were not entirely swayed, even before the results came in. They weren't convinced by state pronouncements that a new liberalization was going to bring kind of milk and honey. There was, yes, a desire amongst many Russians for a more democratic society, largely from the point of fact that it would be more transparent and less corrupt. People, by and large, don't like corruption. It is a problematic thing for most people to have to live with, and it breeds unfairness and resentment. And in the case of Russia, in the run up to the end of communism, it breeds shortages and more hardship. But the idea that there were, thousands and hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of Russians eagerly awaiting liberal, democratic, free market capitalism, assuming that it was going to bring the kinds of living standards that one saw in the West, I think that one's for the birds. Really, I find no evidence that there were large numbers of Russians with that outlook, that kind of expectation. And when they experience what we think of as free market capitalism, what they experience is really an acceleration straight to kind of the beginnings of oligarchic kind of. I don't even know if we can call it capitalism. It's capitalism in the sense that it is the rule of private wealth. It is the rule of capital. What it manifests itself is in a kind of particular form of private oligarchic capture of state assets and rentierism. And in a way, in a direct way, America has descended into this too. All capitalisms are a kind of a rentierism. Private capital is only able to take the risks that it can do, and it doesn't really like taking risks. The idea that people should be called entrepreneurs, well, risk taker, is a kind of a bit of a generous one, really. I mean, capitalism is all about the avoidance of as much risk as possible. This is why when you have fairly functional capitalist states, such as America during the New Deal, or America during the Second World War, it's because you have the state able to take on the risks that private capital can't. I mean, of course, states can, with their own sovereign currency, can do as they please. Really, we've concocted this idea mainly in the Western world, actually since around 1694, in the establishment of the first national debt in England, that states somehow need to rent money off private lenders, and they don't. This is a kind of a nonsense which just kind of helps financial markets to have an endless summer, but that's a whole other conversation. But capital, we tend to get rentier capitalism, i.e. the capture of resources, ring fencing them, charging people access. Firstly, when democratic states become corrupted by capital, you only need to look at the state of British water now, where Britain has the most privatized water system in the world. It's full of shit, basically, quite literally and figuratively, and some of the most expensive water rates in the world, because we've allowed private capital to capture our water. The sort of thing that tends to bring about violent revolutions in other countries, but Britain doesn't really do that kind of thing. But there is only so much political fallout that the public is willing to tolerate on that one, but we shall see. So rentier capitalism, the charging of rents, is kind of like a different version of capitalism to, say, for example, the creation of new technologies. New technologies are the sorts of things that we like to think that capitalism is. The creation of engineering and computing and biomedicines and things like that. Those do get created under conditions of capitalism, normally with large state subsidies, but that's a kind of a good use of state subsidy to partner with, say, a biotech company to create a vaccine that that can help people, that can improve their lives, improve their longevity, and will overall improve the wealth of the nation, literally. But it's something that because of the kind of longitude of the project and the risks involved and the expense involved, private capital can't shoulder all of that, and it has to provide shareholder return, because that's how it works. So once you start to kind of chip away at the at democracy, once you start to allow oligarchs to have decision-making powers, what they tend to do, and we can see this in America now with Doge and things like that, is they tend to sit around and they either will divert resources into some little pet project of theirs. You look at Robert Kennedy and his various wacky ideas about public health, or they'll simply say, well, my company doesn't seem to benefit very much from that public service, so let's kill it, because the state has been captured. The state has been captured, and the means of kind of persuasion and coercion have been captured. And at this point, of course, also the media system has been captured by oligarchic power. So oligarchs can do these sorts of things. They can axe welfare programs without much worry, really, in the long term, that people are going to be rolling out the guillotine. In America now, people talk about the prospects of civil war in America, but you have to remember that revolutions and civil wars are normally the product, such as France in 1789, Russia in 1917. They're the product of state collapse. The state loses the power to defend itself. And I don't see the American state losing that power. Are the president's Secret Service men going to desert him? I don't think so. Are soldiers and Marines and Air Force men going to walk away from the US Constitution that they've sworn to defend? Well, no, I don't think so. Well, the moment that their wages stop being paid, if there's some kind of dollar collapse around the world, the moment that their pensions stop being paid, then it might be a different story.
This summer, Instacart is bringing back your favorites from 1999 with prices from 1999. That means 90s prices on juice pouches that ought to be respected, 90s prices on box mac and cheese, and 90s prices on ham, cheese, and cracker lunches. Enjoy all those throwbacks and more at throwback prices, only through Instacart. $4.72 maximum discount per $10 of eligible items. Limit one offer per order. Expires September 5th while supplies last. Discount based on CPI comparison. When you think of skyrocketing brands like Aloe, Allbirds, or Skims, it's easy to credit their success to great products, sleek branding, and brilliant marketing. But here's the overlooked secret. The real magic lies in the engine behind the scenes, the business powering their business. For millions of brands, that engine is Shopify, making selling seamless for them and shopping effortless for us. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Aloe Yoga uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/retail, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/retail to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/retail.
But if you're an oligarch now, you can be fairly confident that you can do much of what you like. And then if the midterms go against, say, Trump, well, you can dump him. It's fine. You can. There are plenty of Democrats you can switch behind. And when last week Musk finally broke with Trump, the first people to start courting him were, of course, the Democrat Party. So it's like one flea, two dogs. So there is my kind of general thesis, and you don't get so much rentier-based capitalism in China. China is focused. I'm not saying there isn't none, because I'm sure there is, but China's main focus is on manufacturing, engineering, and production and infrastructure, building stuff, making stuff. Interestingly, China brought its oligarchs to heel. So the oligarchic coups that happened in the USA and in Russia, the product of neoliberalism itself, never managed to take root in China. And not suggesting that China is some benign, wonderful kind of cuddly regime at all. China's current successors have built on a gigantic mound of bones and skulls. We always must remember that. But China seems to have insulated itself from the malaise that saps both Russia and America. One of the malaises. Anyway, so some cracking interviews tomorrow. Stay tuned, and thanks so much for listening, and I'll catch you on the next Explaining History podcast. All the best. Bye-bye.
For Mervis Diamond Importers, this is Ronnie Mervis. In a sea of ordinary engagement rings, Takori stands out. Takori rings feature hidden, intricate details. Because your ring should be as extraordinary as your love. Not mass-produced, never generic, always personal. Crafted with passion in every meticulous detail. Takori, no boring rings. Why settle for the same ring as everybody else? And when you pair the unmatched beauty of a world-famous Mervis diamond with your Takori engagement ring, it says even more. Mervis means more diamonds, better quality, and the most value. With easy Mervis financing, you can get her dream diamond now. Don't wait. To shop our mouth-watering Mervis diamonds and the largest selection of Takori bridal jewelry in the tri-state area, visit us in-store or go online to mervisdiamond.com or call for an appointment at 800-HER-LOVE. Again, that's mervisdiamond.com or 800-HER-LOVE. Mervis Diamond Importers, your official Takori jeweler.
When you think of skyrocketing brands like Aloe, Allbirds, or Skims, it's easy to credit their success to great products, sleek branding, and brilliant marketing. But here's the overlooked secret. The real magic lies in the engine behind the scenes, the business powering their business. For millions of brands, that engine is Shopify, making selling seamless for them and shopping effortless for us. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Aloe Yoga uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/retail, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/retail to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/retail.